Perfect. Thank you, Harry. So before we invite our guest up for the evening, I wanted to just kind of talk about ETH Denver. Was anybody here at ETH Denver? Wow, that was a good turnout. So I decided to go to ETH Denver about 7 hours before I took off. And I was like, we have the TF Labs Telegram group. Is everybody in the TF Labs Telegram group? If not, come find me or find someone else that's in it. There's also a Seattle Crypto Telegram group as well, if you don't know about that one either. But thankfully, a lot of people encouraged me to go, and that's why I ended up going. And I'm really glad I went because the energy was completely different than any event I've been to in the last 2 years. So as a founder who has you're always like perpetually raising capital. You go to talk to investors a couple months ago, and it's like, oh yeah, cool, sounds good. And now you talk to investors like, yeah, let's talk. Let's set up time to talk. Let's set up time to talk this week or next week, etc. The different blockchains that were there were also very, very excited, and you can tell people are excited about building and these sorts of things. RFK Jr. Was there with Caitlin Long. Caitlin Long has actually been to Seattle. Joseph Vincent and myself brought her, helped get her over here for an event that Joseph Vincent did. When was that? Was that 2018? It was a while ago, but yeah, but she, she did a fantastic job interviewing him, and it's great to see kind of his take on everything. You can watch that video online; it's already on YouTube. I posted about it, so someone put it in my comments, the link. So if you go to my LinkedIn, you'll find it there. But all in all, I'd say ETH Denver was really, really positive, and it's really nice to see crypto kind of going up. And, just because it's going up now doesn't mean it's going to go up forever. But it does look like it's maturing a lot more than ever, right? So you have the Bitcoin ETF, and you have someone has to know the number. What's the amount of dollars that are going in daily? Is it 50 million? 500. Yeah, I knew it was 5 zeros. I just didn't remember how many zeros. Yeah. So it's already half the size of the gold ETF. And it's only been a couple months. So that's pretty interesting, right? And so you have Ethereum as well. What's also been interesting is seeing all the meme coins just rocket, or as other people call them, shit coins. And so you have a lot of coins like Bonk and Dog Whiff Hat, and I'm not promoting any of these. I'm just saying these are some of the names. These are there's even a Trump coin. There's a lot of different coins out there, and so it'll be interesting to see how these meme coins go, because last cycle, the main meme coin was Dogecoin, and now there's hundreds of meme coins that are out there. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes as well. But yeah, no, I'm really excited for this event that we're going to do here tonight. I'm really thankful for all of you that are here. We got to be at 70 plus here. We're 80. 85 people here, so we got a lot of people in this space, and so I want to thank you all for being here. And in particular, as you know, we always make our events free. So these events are always free, but we do have a price that is support TF Labs, right? And it's basically $10, or you can put any amount that you want over that. So for those of you who paid the $10, thank you so much. That helps put the event on. It helps make sure that we get enough food and drinks and alcohol and that sort of thing. In addition to our sponsors. So thank you, everybody who does do that. And, I think we could all agree that you'd probably pay more than $10 for all the food and alcohol that you've eaten, right? So, so if you wouldn't mind in the future supporting us in that regard, but again, we'll always make it free because we never want price to be a reason as to why someone cannot, participate in one of our events. I think that's all I got overall. But so with that, let's go ahead and welcome our amazing speakers. And I'm just going to do it in the order that I have them on the screen, so that way they kind of sit underneath them. So let's go ahead and welcome Dan Thygesen, who is the SVP of Wholesale for T-Mobile. And he also works on innovation. Yeah, you're going to sit in the center seat without knocking anything down. Caesar, can you help me out? Can you tighten that on that knob, though, on the elbow? Yeah, perfect. Thank you. Okay, and next, let's go ahead and welcome Yorke Rhodes, who is the Director of Digital Transformation for Microsoft, and now also the co-founder of blockchain at Microsoft. And last but certainly not least, let's go ahead and welcome Melanie Colton. And Melanie is the managing director at Accenture, and she works on emerging tech, things like blockchain. So I just got to do a mic check real quick. And so just a quick little tip for everybody. Pretend like you're eating an ice cream cone when you speak into the mic. So it's kind of like right below your lip, and then it'll sound the best, and I'll make sure that you all sound good. Or if I go like this, or I'll go like this, basically, so you get closer to it. So can everybody out there hear us? You can hear us all right? All right, good. So we'll amplify our voices as well. But again, so thank you so much for being here. We're here at the TF Labs and Niftmint offices in Seattle, Washington. We got a beautiful deck and a beautiful view of the Space Needle, so make sure that you take a picture of the Space Needle here when you have a second. And we got a packed house of 85 people plus in here. And we're here to talk about Enterprise Web3, which Enterprise Web3 can mean a lot of different things. And, you know, for me, I would say as someone who is a founder, a startup founder, I love hearing about the enterprise in Web3 because it gives it a sense of validation, especially when, you know, as someone who's been talking to investors for 5 or 6 years and, you know, slowly like that appetite has changed. You know, a lot of times people think of crypto and they only think about either speculative aspects of it or they think about cryptocurrency or, you know, unfortunately they think about nefarious activity, which it's not as much as it's made out to be. So anytime I think about the enterprise working in Web3, it's like, well, wait a second. Obviously, you know, you're a for-profit business, profit maximizing business. So you obviously see a business use case in this. And so I'm excited to get through that and hear what y'all have to say. So real quick too, let's actually, Dan, can you scoot a little bit towards me and the Yorke as well? And then that way Melanie can scoot a little bit closer into. Perfect. Excellent. That's perfect. All right. So let's go ahead and go down the line. And Dan, if you could go ahead and introduce yourself, I'd love for everybody to get to know you.
Sure. Thank you. My name's Dan Thygesen. I'm the SVP of Wholesale Innovation and Partnerships at T-Mobile over in Bellevue. And been there quite a while. It's been a pretty traditional kind of Web 2 journey up until about, I don't know, maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago now. And some friends of mine introduced me to sort of some of the things that were happening in the Web 3 space. And I met Jonathan and a few others that are in the room tonight. And from that, I developed a personal interest in Web 3 as a technology, the transfer of the technology into utility and started to think about ways to create value as part of that. And it sort of automatically became extensible into my job at T-Mobile and looking for ways to incorporate the technology more broadly across the enterprise in pursuit of, you know, generally like value, in this case, revenue. And so that's why I'm super interested to be here tonight and hear the panel talk a little bit and hear what kind of questions you guys have about how you think about it and how we think about it. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Dan. Round of applause for Dan. All right, Yorke.
All right, so I got into the space in 2015. I actually had the fortune to meet Joe Lubin from Consensus, bring Consensus on as a first partner at Microsoft in the Web3 space when I was working in the partner business. And I had just come back to Microsoft in November 2014 and sort of fell down the blockchain rabbit hole about 6 months later. Pretty early from a tech perspective, very messy market. Took me about 6 months to convince myself that digital uniqueness on a global domain actually was legit, which is obviously what we have in the cryptocurrency space as well as the technology space. And once I did that, then I essentially pivoted all of my work at Microsoft, and I told my boss and my boss's boss that I was going to be working in this technology for the next 10 years, and if they wanted me to stay on their team, then they were going to have to let me shift all of my work into the space. And so that's what really started our blockchain business. We started working very closely with a lot of the companies in the Consensus studio at the time, which included Infura, MetaMask, the original Solidity plugin for Visual Studio, which we shipped in March 2016, along with some folks who were at Consensus at the time. And I transitioned from that role into, well, two things happened when I was in that role. helped to incubate and start the blockchain engineering team at Microsoft, and I also helped to incubate and start the decentralized identity work, which today you hear a lot about, verifiable claims and DIDs. We basically found a guy at Microsoft who was a visionary in the DID space, and introduced him to the Microsoft identity team. And so in the identity organization at Microsoft, we also have a product that's now called Entra. And Entra has a feature set called Verified ID, and that is the ability to issue credentials and decentralized identities for anyone who's in the Entra product, essentially. So that's kind of interesting. That ran on a parallel track to any of the other work that we were doing. I kind of was way more interested in Web3 than I was in DID, and so I kind of set that off and allowed the teams to take that. That visionary, by the way, is at Block at this point. He left Microsoft to go work with Mr. Dorsey, which is fine. It was actually a good place for him. So then I moved into the blockchain engineering team when the timing was right. I spent a couple of years there. And while I was doing that work, my role on the blockchain engineering team was to work with advanced customers who were essentially going to production. And so 2 projects that I worked on which were really meaningful. This is 2018 at this point. One was the blockchain bond project that the World Bank and Commerce Bank of Australia collaborated on. They called me in early 2018 and said, hey, we got to launch this in the production cloud of World Bank, which was Microsoft's cloud product called Azure. And it's currently on Google. And this was like, I don't know, this is probably like April or May of 2018. And the vice president, a wonderful woman named Arunma Ote, who's now a professor at Oxford University, she was the vice president of the Treasury of the World Bank. And she said, we're going to launch this on August 1st. So basically cloud port, QA testing, production testing of a blockchain implementation, private blockchain implementation, but still. It was Ethereum-based, and we launched this bond on August 14th. And so it was very highly successful, raised over $150 million. The bond had a term of 2 years. Why did the Treasury of the World Bank do this? Because they believed that this technology and this moment that we're seeing today with ETFs was coming, and that they wanted to sort of signal to the market that, like, you should be looking at this technology. And that was just such a wonderful experience to help them bring that to production, basically sitting in at the terminals in the Treasury doing UA testing. It was just such an amazing experience. The other project, maybe not as exciting, that I started in 2018 was in the supply chain, and it happened to be in the cloud supply chain at Microsoft. In February 2018, I talked to the general manager of sourcing for cloud in Microsoft, which basically means they source all of the goods that go into servers, that go into our racks, that go into our data centers, to essentially power the data centers around the world. So everything you see in AI, those chips are running through our blockchain infrastructure today. So we envisioned this traceability program for high-value chips in the cloud blockchain work that we started along with Accenture. We basically did an RFP in like 2019, hired Accenture to help us on this journey. And we did traceability first, so traceability of high-value chips. And then in the last January, after about 2 years of work, we layered on financial controls. And financial controls basically is moving from a lot of very loose financial practices with billions of dollars of chips at play to much more control, ARAP processes, financial controls, et cetera, et cetera. And that went into production last January, finally. And that project is a massive success in terms of a cost of capital benefit that you can get because of the details of having a shared subledger that you have in a blockchain context. This is all based on Ethereum, so it's essentially the Web3 stacks that we see today in the public context. And so, I'm also a board member and a founding board member of the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance, and which Accenture was at one point, and hopefully they're coming back. That work, we've seen a massive shift in the market to how do we get public blockchain accessible to enterprises, and so that's what excites me the most. And so when I like a lot of the work that I've been doing, for example, if anyone's familiar with the baseline protocol, the baseline protocol was basically the first enterprise product implementation that you could do enterprise data on public blockchain. And it was probably also the first zero knowledge proof implementation using shielded circuits to protect that data. Now it was a very nuanced solution for very specific purposes, and it's still around, but it's just not that widely adopted. But if you look at everything that's going on in the zero knowledge space, that was the forerunner to where we are now. So it's pretty interesting. When I think back on that, I'm like, well, I didn't realize that was going to happen. Melanie, go ahead.
All right. It's hard to follow you guys, but I've been in the blockchain space since 2015. I live in Denver, so I got to go to ETH Denver in my hometown. So I was here in Seattle last week, went home for ETH Denver, and came back. And sometime I think I saw my kids and my family. Like not too much. No, it was fantastic. But so I've had a career of deep supply chain expertise in back office operations in kind of every industry of the world, in some pretty incredible, and along the same timeline. 2015, I started a team called the Tech Garage, where we looked at all new tech and said, how do we go transform businesses with kind of emerging technology as a whole? And I fell in love with blockchain and made a similar case of, I think, Chip and I became like employee number 1 and 2 that were full-time blockchain across our huge organization, right? Accenture, 700,000 people, right? So like we got to then like co-led our blockchain practice for a couple of years, and then moved across Gen AI plus a number of related technologies. Because what is really interesting, and so got the chance to fly around the world and teach blockchain basics to all of our employees, help our account teams talk to their clients. Probably was at a pace of talking to a dozen enterprise level clients a week, a month, just on what do they want to know, what do they need to understand, how can they get to value. And across the board, it always came back to money, identity, objects, and supply chains. You could money, right, is tokenizable money, right? How do we think about that? What is money? How does money change hands? How does money move between banks? What does money do? Identity, verifiable credentials, as Yorke said, right? Like the idea of, how do you create an ecosystem in which you share more data in a very secure way? Early modes of zero knowledge proofs, as this has just moved so far across the board. Objects, right? Tokenizing everything. Like we went from a paper to digital. Like Accenture, had an entire digital business, right? Now it's how do you tokenize and take the tokenized value and distribute that across? We called our team multi-party systems for a while, right? Because blockchain was a bad word for enterprises for a while, so we just called it the multi-party systems. How do you, right, to remind people they actually have to use a blockchain across more than your 4 walls of your organization.
Don't use that word.
We tried. We tried. And yeah, it's come and gone. It's come and gone, and Web3 is the terms that's sticking. And then across supply chains, right? Because if you think of just organizations that we've got plenty of products out there that'll help you manage the data that's in your control. We have very few, right? Early networks. I was in early e-procurement days building e-procurement networks for supply chains in the hub and spoke model, because that's what we had options for, right? With the technology at the time, you had a hub and spoke where you could put a bunch of data in the middle, everybody connect. It solved integration layer problems. It solves standards and such. But in supply chains, there's so much more. Then I go, okay, hub and spoke. Now I got another spoke. I got another layer to my supply chain. How do I start to get to value across that? So always trying to find where is value, but they tend to fall in those 4 kind of categories.
I love it. So much great information here, and fun just hearing how you all just got interested and involved with the Web3 space and what's happening. Before we move forward, we're a place where we want to encourage you to pull your phone out. So feel free to pull your phone out, take pictures, give people FOMO and make them feel silly for not being here. But yeah, you can take pictures, put it on Twitter, tag us at TF Labs or at Niftmint on Twitter and LinkedIn, and we'll make sure that we reply to there too. I want to touch on first kind of part of the conversation on something that Melanie said, selfishly because it's what I'm interested in. And you talked about tokenizing everything, right? We're very big believers in that ourselves at Niftmint and tokenizing everything. And I swear you probably looked at my deck. No, I'm just kidding. But I have a page in my deck where I have 3 photos, and I call the first one analog, the second one digital, and the third one tokenized. And the reason I like to do that is because I talk about kind of like how, in this analog context, everything was very much, paper or siloed. Digital kind of gave it a life in different areas. You can view it in different places. Programmable to an extent in the sense that, wherever it's living. But then tokenized gives it this new opportunity where you can have it live inside of the network. You can have it live outside of the network. And also you can put a lot of interesting information in there, right? You can put metadata in there. You can put the security level information. You can put rules in place, how it unlocks things. So I'd love to just start the conversation on tokenization and just, how you all think about tokenization when it comes to either, your internal processes or products or services that you're doing. And whoever wants to just grab the mic to start, have at it.
I'll go. I think about it in a sense that, so first of all, it diversifies how you get to use information, right? You hear a lot in the mainstream media these days about tokenizing real world assets. And from a technology perspective, I think there's one way to look at it. But from the utility and the value creation, it's really an opportunity to monetize things in a brand new way, in a way that nobody's really been able to capture before. It also is super helpful in gamifying to an extent how you incentivize people's behavior in a form of gamifying or monetizing these things. That's a little bit more on the sort of the interactive level in terms of how you can get people to do certain things when you tokenize the things that they're used to sort of like working with or collaborating with other people with. I see lots of opportunities for that. You can tokenize your assets across supply chain. I bet you've got some amazing examples of how you drive efficiency into the business. But you can also do it in ways that you interact with people, I think. We see a lot of opportunities. When you think about enterprises, there's a way to think about how an enterprise goes to market and tokenizes things in pursuit of incremental revenue, like accretive value. But there's also ways that tokenization will enable an enterprise to actually drive a ton of efficiencies into how they operate. And so, there's an old saying like a penny saved is a penny earned. That's really, really true, because when you can drive a ton of efficiency through tokenization or blockchain utilization, whether it's part of your supply chain or how you manage your employee programs or how you treat your customers, whatever that might be, you're reducing your OpEx. And when you're reducing your OpEx, that savings goes straight to your bottom line. It's profit. So I think as more and more people start to recognize where those opportunities are to tokenize different parts of their asset chain or the value proposition, you're going to see a ton of incremental savings and a ton of incremental revenue, because those things are sort of opposite sides of the balance sheet, but the same thing, right?
Yeah, and I think it's also helpful from a context perspective. Like, we all operate in this digital first world. When we think about a token, we don't actually realize what does that token mean to the non-digital world. Yeah. Right? And you mentioned supply chain. The way we think about, say, for example, an Intel CPU or an NVIDIA GPU, those are tokenized assets. And what we've done with tokenizing those assets is we've been able to fuse together three things that we don't think about in the digital world. One is the documentation associated with those assets. One is the movement of those assets. And the other is the value and a whole bunch of other attributes associated with those assets. And in the digital first world, it just happens, right? If you think about DeFi, right? But all of those things exist. They just happen to exist locked into the token. In the context of a supply chain, those things are completely different workflows, which is why you have the inefficiencies, right? Money moves separately from products movement from documentation. And with a token, you can collapse all those together, track them all together, and realize very significant value propositions. In the financial controls example that we used, I'm going to give you public numbers here, so not saying anything that I shouldn't say. If you search on the internet, how much money does Microsoft spend in their cloud CapEx per year, you can find the number. It's $28 billion probably is the number that you'll find. $28 billion per year. That's a run rate of multiple billion dollars per month, right? All of that is flowing through our blockchain tokenized infrastructure, and we're able to get the efficiencies out of that and know, for example, exactly when a chip manufacturer ships stuff out of their factory, when it arrives in our warehouse, when the invoicing process starts, when we have to actually fund the warehouse to pay the invoice. And so we do just-in-time funding, which is where we get the capital expenditure value proposition. And if anyone knows CapEx value propositions, different CFO or treasury organizations calculate it differently, but it's about a 10% value proposition. So if you are getting capital efficiencies where you've taken 45-day cash out of pocket down to 0-day cash out of pocket, that's a pretty significant benefit when you think about billions of dollars and numbers like 10%.
Capital's expensive.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Also, like when you're holding capital, you also invest it, right? So it's more than just like the cost of the capital. It's also what you could be doing with it from an opportunity cost perspective. You can't get that if you don't have the type of knowledge that we take for granted in like the DeFi and the token ecosystem, because all those things are fused together. And in a supply chain where there's physical assets, they're not, and you have to actually do the work to get there.
There's so many layers I could go off with this, but like one of the cool things is consulting is like, and for you guys, as you're thinking of startups, if you're founders, I talked to lots of people who were founders, finding individuals like this who are going to take a personal passion to understand the industry and go first are key, right? Because it's really, it takes a bit of a career passion for you to continue to defend the programs, because a lot of times in consulting when we're like often clients will be like, show me 3 times when you've done this before. I'm like, no one's done this before. Like, you're going to go get there's big value pools and opportunities here. So you have to be willing to take some risks to do so. And there's personal risks and as well. Like, are they positioned well to help go create value for the company? And back to what Dan said, right? Like, any use case is either going to help a company make money or save money. Right? And which side of that equation are they incented to do? Where do they want to use the technology to do so? And so tokenization applies to helping companies make money and getting into the sharing economy, right? Like, how are we getting into this sharing economy in which you think your customers now have a share of value and a share of wallet in your product and actually can engage with your product very differently? That is an entire movement around how people are engaging with brands differently. There is a ton of opportunity in that space. And then the save money is the efficiencies, the plays, we have our BPO business has like more than 100,000 people in it who are in an exception management business. If we can get rid of exception management, right? Like through automation, and through then actual good data, we can actually, it's a good thing for us, right? Like, how do we like start to drive the need to not have people doing the reconciliation of work, but actually have systems that are between companies doing reconciliation of work. So what's your goal, right? Engage with your customers differently. How do you engage that way? And then how do you like run your business, to your point of like run your business more effectively? And there's opportunities everywhere.
By the way, there is a good article on Treasury and Risk magazine about the supply chain financial use case that I just talked about. If you go search for Microsoft blockchain work on that magazine, you can find a very detailed article about the stuff that we've said publicly.
You know what's interesting too is if you think about how fast and furious AI came into the mainstream sort of marketplace, people realized almost immediately that AI can save you money if you use it this way, or it can make you money if you use it this way. But it seems like to try to have that conversation and convince people how blockchain can do that, or how NFTs can do that, or how more general Web3 principles might be able to do those things for you is a lot more difficult, because we tend to get stuck talking about the technology, which is great if you're a technologist, but that doesn't solve the problem for the business people or the people that have to market. Whereas with AI, it's a little bit easier to understand, especially with generative AI and the way large language models are sort of talked about and implemented these days. It's a little bit easier to understand how those work and how the value is derived.
By the way, I do take exception that AI came into this moment very quickly. It was like 20 years of investment.
Yeah,
right? Like
yeah, exactly.
Multi-billion-dollar investment, and then all of a sudden.
Yeah, that's right. I crack up at that too. Like 20 years ago, we were working on this thing called an IVR, which is, you call into customer care and you get this automated response system, and they kind of walk you through a bunch of options. Well, you know what? It turns out like that's essentially old school AI, right? It's prompt based. It understands based on what you tell it how to respond. It's not necessarily learning, so it's not generative in that sense, but it is a machine that understands how it's supposed to respond to you based on prompts. right? And so it is kind of funny that, in the last year or so, it's just gone like completely sideways in popularity, which is a good thing, I think. But it has been around for a long time. Maybe that's why it's easier to understand.
And what's interesting on the AI front, right, is it kind of had like this double, call it like a double curve in interest, right? Because in 2014, 2015, there's a ton of companies all talking about AI, and then that all died down. Web3 kind of took over for a little bit, and then sure enough, now we're in this AI hype cycle. And it might be the case that Web3 is kind of come back in that in that hype cycle as well. And fortunately and unfortunately, I think it has to do with the market, right? Like when the crypto market does well. But one thing that I'm really encouraged about is the fact that all three of you and your companies have been active in Web3, even in a bear market, right? And so, we saw at Niftmint in 2020, 2021, when we were first coming up with a concept, we saw a ton of brands wanting to get into Web3 and for everything. We had brands come up to us telling us they wanted to be the next Bored Apes. We want to be the next Bored Apes. And we would reply, you're not going to be the next Bored Apes. Like that's not how that works. That's not, that's a different use case overall. And then sure enough, when, we all know what happened in October, November 2022 with FTX and SBF, that kind of slowed things down, right? And so you had a lot of brands or a lot of organizations say like, hey, like we believe in this, but we're going to take a pause. But it sounds like all three of you, and actually I met Dan post that. So like it was probably like a month or so after that. So, right. So, talk to me a little bit about that in regards to how do you think about Web3 within your organization and driving it towards innovation, regardless of what the market thinks about it or regardless of what external factors are taking place, and actually regardless of what maybe internal factors are taking place? Because I can imagine that if the market is going bad, you might have some people in even within your own organization saying like, why the heck are we doing this right now? So anybody jump in here.
And Melanie said it. It's often a game of defense, right? When it comes to sort of pressure from people that don't understand where the value piece of it exists, and so you find yourself sort of like battling it out on the regular.
Well, I think like Web3, AI, metaverse, right? They're all innovations, and every innovation has the same issues, which is 95% of the people don't believe that they're gonna grow up and be anything, right? And so that's not a Web3 problem; it's a general problem. And in large organizations, that is a very significant problem, because what do you invest your time in, right? You invest your time in the things you think are going to make it based on your own personal perspective, right? And so when you have to have believers in a particular technology or technical approach in any innovation cycle in order to burst through the typical curve of adoption and crossing the chasm moments. You need use cases that prove that things have value, right? One of the greatest use cases we have at Microsoft is the cloud supply chain work in blockchain. You just can't argue with success, right? And that's really important. One of the other things I think that's on the positive side, like AI is a utility for everything, and AI will be in everything. So if you're not touching AI today, you should be, because it will be in everything. It's just a utility. I look at it like Microsoft Office or the PC or Google, right? Google Docs or whatever, right? So you need to learn it and learn how to use it in a relevant way for you and for your business. And that's a different thing a little bit than how people think about Web3. And then one other problem with Web3, we've tied engineering technology to value. But let me ask the question here first. How many engineers are in the audience? Okay. How many builders are in the audience? Technology product builders. How many crypto investors are in the audience? How many crypto speculators are in the audience? Okay. So it's pretty even mix.
I think it was all the same people.
Willing to raise your hand.
So like data points in like technology engineering skeptics, right? And I work for Microsoft. There's a lot of like old school engineers at Microsoft for many, many years. going back 20 years. When I first introduced the idea of decentralized technology for identity, I got a 10-paragraph email slamming the fact that this had any value whatsoever in the world from a guy who'd been in identity for 20 years, right? That happens in every innovation space, right? You just have people who completely believe what they believe, and that's, anything else is garbage, right? And so, that's always going to be a problem. What we have that's really interesting about this technology space that I realized early on is we have an incentive model for open source technology, and we have communities of people who have common goals, who don't have to be working at the same company, who can, whatever the term in, rising tide rises all boats type of scenario. That changes the dynamics of so many things. But for old school engineers, why did people become old school engineers in identity and cryptography and things like that? Because they didn't want to go into Wall Street, right? Why didn't they want to go into Wall Street? Because money is dirty. So old school engineers see crypto and they think money is dirty. Why is this touching my technology? It can't be good, right? And so that's a problem we also have to overcome as an industry. It's a value case, and money or value is one attribute of a token, right? And I think if we're careful how we talk about value in this industry and try to keep it away from the speculative language, because that's very loud, that we'll do much better in terms of getting people to understand what is the value case of this technology. And I'll stop here in a second. For old school technologists, I used to liken things like Solidity and the EVM as like SQL Server with, stored procedures, right? Very different, but very similar, very low-tech language, runs in a runtime environment, right, on top of a database, right? Ethereum is a decentralized version of that with Solidity, right? And so there are concepts here that people understand. And I also, by the way, my first programming language that I learned eons ago was assembler on a IBM PC, essentially. And to me, when I saw Solidity, I was like, oh, assembler, right? I know this. This is a fun little language that has really quirky things you have to do with it to make it work well. But yeah, it's something to watch out for. So I think it's an important point. Do you want to add something?
I could go in lots of directions with that, but it's important to think it is just another innovation wave, and when it's it's actually helpful when there's less hype going around because you actually just focus on getting product, getting value, getting opportunities, and less about the noise. So we continue to see engagement in the valuable use cases that have flushed out some of the activity, but it's been our tech vision over the last few years has hit this for years as this is coming, right? We always have these moments, and I think these blockchain as a whole, Web3 as a whole, is having that when you can, if you fast forward, I don't know what your timeline is, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, and you're shopping for a solution of technology to go solve tokenization, or a marketing loyalty activation program or a supply chain program, you won't say, I want a blockchain one. You will just say, I want a solution that works, right? And so the bake-off to those are actually traditional tech, because the value is so obvious that I'm going to take this tech. It's the right price point. I'm not going to pay more for a different tech unless it's better, right? So we got to get past the cycle of innovation. But what I love about this, and to your point of open source, right? We work with the Linux Foundation. I think I haven't pulled the stat recently, but we had contributed 7 million lines of code to the Hyperledger Foundation in just multiple different projects, identity and interoperability and such, because it's so important to see that the innovation you guys are creating today in an open source way is driving all industries forward, and is creating so much more than one company can. And I love AI, you buy AI from a big tech company, right? And it works in a certain way, versus so much of what's happening in Web3 is community engagement, in driving together in some of the most brilliant tech, and challenge, and in places where you can challenge legacy tech engineers, right? Who don't have that badge of honor and said, I invented here, right? And so I love what it's doing to the ecosystem as a whole. We're starting to see smarter, faster, easier ways to do all of the layers in the Web3 stack, and every layer needs innovation. We're not done, right? Like it's super important to know we're not done in Web3 because we've got more privacy solutions needed for different use cases. We have to get zero knowledge proof where compute power is not like all over like off the value chain around what actual value you're going to save so you can use it in every use case. There's lots more that we can do. And so I loved ETH Denver for that perspective because like you just see like brilliant minds solving each of these individual problems and together it rises those tides.
Yeah, I think what's funny also in regards to that is that, no one can be an expert across all Web3, right? Like there's you have to really specialize in something. I mean, sure, you can have an understanding of everything, but sometimes when I talk to people that are working on like ZK rollups, I'm like, you're doing what? Wait, how does that work? Or things like that. So it's really exciting. And I think it also, of course, gives, lots of people a lot of different opportunities across this, right? Like you don't have to be a Solidity developer to be in blockchain, right? Like at the end of the day, you're just kind of receiving APIs. So, maybe you just need to understand how to take in the blockchain into the product. I remember in 2017 ICO days, is you'd have all these companies talk about, this new token that they would be doing. And the funniest one I remember seeing was a tow truck coin. And so it was basically like, yeah, like a coin to power when your car breaks down and you need to get a tow. And it was just funny to me because it's like at the same time as you, in addition to the token, you still have to build the product, right? So like if you wanted to do, Zillow for real estate, you have to build Zillow first to then be able, Zillow for Web3, you still have to build Zillow and then apply the Web3 to it, right? You have to have the product. So, that leads me to my next question is, how do you think about Web3 or crypto or blockchain, et cetera, in the context of your existing product offering, right? Like, so like strengthening the core products that you already have. It's not like you necessarily need to, build a brand new product from zero. It's complementing, existing products or existing scenarios or helping you solve existing core business issues.
Well, I can talk about a couple of examples. Melanie just made me aware of verifiable claims or credentials on LinkedIn. So that actually is something we've been hoping would start for a while. Very logical place to have those. Obviously, being able to verify work history and things like that should also massively change the background check industry through verifiable data. And so that's an interesting one. It's sort of just happening in the background, like nobody's talking about it. It's just rolling out. And they're getting companies on board. Now it is Microsoft, so we've been talking about this for years, but it is happening. Microsoft also, so I was at Microsoft in the 90s, in addition to my current tour at Microsoft. And I was at Microsoft when we shipped Windows 95. And I bring up this point because Windows 95 launched with TCP/IP as a default networking stack, which was a change from NetWare, Novell NetWare, which was the dominant stack at the time. And it launched with browsers. So the Web 2 stack that we know today and that we have all over the internet today literally started in 1995. So Microsoft also has Edge browser today. We also have operating systems today. And so logically, as we look at the future of the web, part of the sort of thinking around the strategy is, well, what's coming, right? And how do we prepare for that if we're thinking about the future of the web? And listen, 95% of the people at Microsoft are not thinking this, but like the people who need to know are thinking this. And so I've been working with the Microsoft Edge browser team for a number of years, helping them understand Web3 technology and where it's relevant. And Microsoft has a lot of billable accounts with consumers. And so there's an effort inside of Microsoft to sort of bring that to one billable account, one wallet, so to speak. And if we're building a wallet today, then we should probably be thinking about what's coming. And so in early builds of the Edge browser in certain markets, you can find crypto wallet capability in the browser. For example, in Brazil, if you go to Brazil today, is that off? If you go to Brazil today, you can actually test this functionality. So that's another example of the stuff being integrated into the product. I had the wonderful opportunity to meet a Microsoft employee today who I collaborated with on a hackathon a couple of years ago on an NFT for Good project, and he's on the Microsoft designer team. Voin over here in the back. So Jonathan, thank you for making that physical connection for me. So excited to see Voin here today. And Microsoft Designer sits essentially as a browser-based product. And so we were looking at how do we create a value proposition around designed assets through this product, and using NFTs as a way to create a different market for these types of assets. And then AI came along, of course, which sucked all the air out of the room. So it's like pockets. Someone was asking me before, like, what's the Microsoft, Web3 division doing at Microsoft? And I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, a division at Microsoft is like an Activision, LinkedIn, GitHub, Dynamics, whatever, right? Cloud. Web3 is a very, very tiny part of Microsoft's business. And so, I think Melanie made the point, like, Microsoft's the type of company where this technology, if it makes sense, will work its way into products without making a lot of fanfare about it. So, LinkedIn's an example of that. The crypto wallet, or the wallet's an example of that, where it has some crypto capabilities in the right markets. So anyway, one of my roles that I do at Microsoft is I advise all these parts of the company and help them make the right choices and not the wrong choices, right? As we're working through this in various ways.
I think the change of data at the edge, right? The idea of, you talked about wallets and such, of like, there is a push from consumers to own your own data, right? We're done with cookies. Like, we'd love to see the end of the cookie war. Like, how do I get my own data? And just the power of wallets alone in this entire concept of like, what data can I, and this entire industry is teaching people a new set of behavior and expectations of how to engage with brands, which is why I love that you're playing with it, right? Like, as I start to take my own data into my own hands and then share it with who I want to share it with the right amount of time, the right amount of rights and obligations in the technology, you change the model of what is consumer expected behavior for any product, right? Like, if I want to say I'm going to consent to sharing this information with you, and then your consent is revoked because I'm done, right? Like, we have very traditional siloed ways of doing that today in central databases versus like they'll store your consent for you and hope you keep it right, versus this idea of in these decentralized models where consumers actually may have control of their own data, share with an ecosystem the pieces and parts they want to know about me, right? Like, there is, a lot of shopping apps that know way too much about my preferences and what's in my garage because I bought some like add-on to my car. Plus they know like that I have kids of this size or age. Like, there's so much that organizations know about me today that if we get into this model right, like, we can actually start to, as consumers, have like control of our own experiences with brands, and therefore how are you going to create value with them by pulling that information, using it the way, then I can have those highly personalized experiences, delight the customer in a way in which I'm not also scaring the heck out of everyone of overusing data, right? And so the idea of just shifting the model, I think there's so many places for productizing that in anywhere you are as a consumer, right? And I think that's what I love. This Web3 movement really has changed consumer behavior. There's an expectation of this sharing economy they can participate in, and of their data ownership, and how they don't always have to just go by the rules. There's some fun parts to that.
By the way, side data point, Accenture and I actually co-funded ID 2020 in 2017, was it? I think it was, or 2017, which was humanitarian identity essentially for refugees, with the thought process around how that would change a refugee experience. And at the time, obviously, the Syrian war was one of the great atrocities of the time. And so we're thinking a lot about, if you wound the clock back 10 or 15 years and people had decentralized identities, what would their experience be like as a refugee versus what it's like now? So we co-funded a not-for-profit to really go down the road and really push that using that technology. So like there's a lot going on for sure.
Yeah, definitely. Lots of good thoughts here, and Melanie, I love what you said there. I feel like I'm just telling. I love what you guys say too, but I just like what Melanie's saying better, probably because it just relates to what I do, selfishly. But yeah, when you think about it.
She's a consultant. She's really good at talking your book.
There you go. Yeah, I love it. I love it. I need to learn that. But look, when you think about the fact of like the unlocking and participating in the value creation of how you contribute to the network, right? And so, even if it's a couple dollar, it's not about like the amount or the quantity, but just knowing that you get to participate in that. I remember when Cambridge Analytica happened, 5-6 years ago with Facebook, and we can fight about this later individually, but I don't think people really cared about their data being lost, because you would have people be on Instagram saying, I'm never using Facebook again, right? So what they cared about is not necessarily getting to participate, in this aspect of it, and feeling like something that they had was being taken from them unjustly, right? And so I think a lot of times when people talk about decentralization has its place, but a lot of times it really has to do less about decentralization, and it's more about ownership or participation.
Yeah, and value that's created by decentralizing somebody's information and then allowing them to make the decision as to how they want to expose that, usually in exchange for some kind of compensation, which is back to tokenizing things, right, and creating a token economics model that drives behavior and incentivizes people who own their own data, own their own information, to use it in a way that sort of benefits them most appropriately.
To your point, like there's no other tech wave that allows you to make a secondary market from the day you create the first market. Like there is, right? Like in a physical goods world, right? To create a secondary exchange in which I bought something and I want to resell something, I got to go to eBay, Craigslist, Marketplace, right? Somewhere to go resell something of like a low item of value. But like when you're creating digital goods, you're immediately then giving them a place to create a secondary market in which they can resell it to someone else and know that it's actually the thing that you said it is, right? It shares that uniqueness, digital ownership, shared state, right? It shares all those attributes about it. So creating a secondary market is actually how they get to then participate in things, right? Because then I'm not just getting a coupon from you to do something. I'm actually getting something, and then it has value that may or go up or down, right? But I get to participate, hold, and play in this entire separate economy, and there's no other tech that lets you do that so quickly. And that's just an interesting moment, right? Like, when do you want a secondary market of your goods? Some brands don't, right? Because there's like there's lots of positive engagement motions that you can create with your customers once you've got them in the ecosystem, because you've got the problem how often of like Coca-Cola and their like cap things. It's like one of the longest running ad things in the world, because Coca-Cola doesn't know who actually buys Coca-Cola, because nobody buys it from Coca-Cola, right? Like they buy it from a store of which you bought Coca-Cola. They love to know who buys it every week. It's in their shopping cart, but they don't get to know in that model. But as you start to engage in tokenized marketing organization, like brands start to actually reach their end consumers no matter where they bought things through, and that changes the entire economy game. It's kind of fun.
By the way, do you guys think that NFT royalties are going to actually make a comeback?
I think they will in the correct contexts. I don't think they will in like a PFP avatar context. So, but I do think they will in like just traditional art, right? So like if I'm an artist and I want to, sell my product to my fans, then yes. Or I think it makes a lot of sense also in like the ticketing space. So if I'm Ticketmaster, or if I'm any organization or even a band for that matter, I don't see it though in the avatar space. Or collectible, yeah, like no, yeah, like the sports authentication.
Sports authentication, and then there are rare cards, unique cards, and there's a whole royalty system that's built around that.
Well, we have had a fantastic conversation here. I was going to open up to questions, but I have a feeling there's going to be a lot of questions. So instead, what I want to do is I want to invite you all to just bombard and bum rush them, and ask them your question. But before we get to that point, what are some just great ways that people can stay in touch with all of you and just follow along with what's going on with your companies and your journey, et cetera?
LinkedIn, probably easiest. Happy to stay connected across the board. But we've always got material. Our tech vision every year. So huge, massive consulting company who talks to the top of the Fortune 500. So we bring them in every year and we tell them that the trends are going to be, and then we sell them the trend, and then we implement the trend, and then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Like, so they've been fairly accurate over the last 20 years in some beautiful ways. So, but it's an interesting view of like taking industry perspectives. This has been a trend for many years. So if you want to watch the history of how this kind of came to life in the in the innovation cycle, it's a fantastic. So keep an eye out for next year of what's building upon that too.
Great. So I'm in a number of Telegram groups that probably I know some of you are in for sure. So that's one place. Some people I've met in Davos for the first time here, Mark, and I would say you know, I've definitely been on Twitter for a while. I'm a little concerned about that platform at this point, but so I spend less time on it. And
You should try this other one called X.
yeah.
It's really similar.
I was actually very encouraged about the advertising of an event on Farcaster last week, so I'm hopeful that something will happen in that category. And Frames is pretty exciting, by the way. And then LinkedIn, obviously, have to be on LinkedIn or GitHub if you want, but LinkedIn too. Yeah. Go ahead, Dan.
I'm all over the place as well. Telegram, LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter. Like I'm here for a specific reason. I am trying to actually propagate the technology into utility and then into value, mostly selfishly through T-Mobile as a wireless network, but not necessarily that, right? And so I'm actually trying to get as many people to reach out to me and to my team, many of whom are here tonight, because we're trying to bring these use cases, these functionalities, these utilities, more so than the technology, by the way. I don't focus on the technology. I focus on the utility. What is the thing that this amazing technology does, and how do we then lean into a value proposition? How do you take that utility and create value? I want as many examples of that we can find, especially if I can bring it to life on like the T-Mobile amazing 5G network. But it would be yeah, that's right. There's a little bit of advertising there. So I'd love to connect with everybody, and the reason I say that is because it sounds sort of funny, but like we're open for business. I want to talk to every single person that has an interesting, creative, unique, accretive, incremental idea, especially if you think you need a wireless carrier to help bring that to life. And it's interesting because there's 120 plus million people on the T-Mobile network, and there's 40 million users just in my line of business, right? And so those are interesting subscriber bases that can be used to test things and to prove things and to pilot things. And one of the things that I really believe is that we're super early in this transformation of the technology into utility, into value. And what we need to do to get mainstream is to create that awareness, because with the awareness comes a broader adoption. And you need to get people more comfortable and more familiar with what those use cases are and what that value is so that they feel comfortable using them, right? And the way we do that is to get more people building.
Can I do a closing statement? No. Yeah. I just want to say thank you for gathering us here together, because I've met people in person who I haven't met before, only like on Telegram, which is just amazing. So thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. Of course.
Super cool.
Awesome. Well, thank you everybody for being here this evening. The best way to stay in touch with TF Labs is make sure that you are on the mailing list. So if you got an email about the event, then that means you're on the mailing list. If you registered for the event, you're on the mailing list. And then also make sure that you're following us on Twitter and LinkedIn. Do also follow us on YouTube as well, please, because that way you get to see these videos all the way through. But we said this last time, and I think a couple people did this, and that is when you come to the next event, bring one other person. And let's just get more and more people here. Like I said, we have 85 people here tonight. Really thankful for that. You know, we've been doing these events consistently for like 6 years now. And for us, it's just really important because, you know, sadly, Seattle doesn't have the investor support on Web3 like other cities do. And so there's a lot of community support that needs to be continuing and growing. So it's really up to us to kind of build that up and welcome investors into the fold, by the way. So just because they're not being supportive now doesn't mean we don't want to welcome them in. So, do encourage folks like that that would be investing into companies, investing into startups, and encourage them to come to these things and learn and get to know more about Web3. And always, feel free to reach out to me if you have an idea for an event that would be fun or interesting to do. Let me know. As I mentioned, we are looking for a chapter director to kind of help organize and continue on some events. Our next event is going to be on April 24th, and it's actually not a Web3 event, but it'll be an interesting event nonetheless. It's going to be about how to get a job at a venture-backed startup, and we're going to have someone from Andreessen Horowitz, someone from Madrona, and someone from Pioneer Square Labs. And then we're working on a Bitcoin event for April as well, because that's going to be right around when the halving starts. But one that's on the calendar that I highly recommend that you come to is going to be Crypto de Mayo, which is going to be on May 2nd. So if you who here has been to Blockchain Backyard in the summer? That's it? I thought a lot more of you have been So Blockchain Backyard is essentially our summer barbecues that we do. We do them once a month. So if you've been to those and you thought those were fun, this is the same thing, but with Mexican food. So awesome. Well, thank you, everybody. You're welcome to hang out here for a while, grab some food. We're going to take a group picture. And yeah, thanks so much.